Hello and welcome back to my very warm greenhouse. Today I want to talk about self-watering planters, also known as SIPs or sub-irrigated planters. I have used different alternatives of these for a number of years and I found them to be extremely beneficial in my garden. The main reason why I like self-watering planters so much is because, as it says in the name, they self-water. Now that doesn't mean that they don't need any maintenance. You still need to nurture and care for your plants. But the main work of watering, particularly regular watering, is pretty much automated and done for you. In a moment, I'm going to show you a few different types of self-watering planters that I have, some that I've purchased, and also some that I've made myself in an attempt to try and recreate them. The reason why I tried to recreate them myself is because I'm based in the UK, and unfortunately, the planters that I was using before are no longer available as they're an EU company. So what is a self-watering planter? A self-watering planter is a planter with a water reservoir based in the bottom of it. The way that it's designed is that the water reservoir underneath the soil wicks up into the soil itself. So the plants are able to effectively pull or wick the water up whenever they want it, rather than being watered whenever the gardener is able to or wants to water the plants. For me, this works in a number of ways. Not just because it's simple and easy, but also to me it seems so much more natural. When you plant plants in the ground outside, there is a natural wicking system from water underneath the ground. And that wicking system allows the water to come up towards the surface and keeps plants fed and watered. Obviously, when it rains, the rain actually allows nutrients to trickle down through the soil into the lower depths of the soil too. And with these wicking type systems, that actually is allowed to happen as well. Obviously not in the greenhouse because it's covered, but if you were using a planter outside. There is a great design feature which stops overwatering and also oversaturation if the self-watering planter is outside and it does get rained on, which is an overflow. Again, I'll show you these things when I show you the different planters. I've also been doing some different tests as well this year with my self-watering planters. I've taken a lot of inspiration from a company called Earthbox, which is based in the US. Again, unfortunately, I'm unable to get these in the UK, particularly at a reasonable price. They use a style of almost like shower cap, which is a cover that goes over the top as a mulch layer effectively, which dramatically reduces evaporation, keeps the top layer of soil moist as well. And when feeding in these types of planters using a top dressing with dry amendments, it really does make a big difference to be able to keep those amendments moist and allow the biology to break it down really nicely. Without using them, the top layer of soil gets really dry and crusty and you don't get that biological breakdown. Again, I'll show you these in just a second. Let's get on to the different types of planters that I've got and I'll show you what they look like and how they differ. Okay, so first up is the Chili Grow planter from Greenhouse Sensation. Now, this is the oldest self-watering planter that I have. They work really well, so I can't really fault them in terms of their operation, but it's more the design that I don't completely love. So the lower reservoir runs across the bottom there. I believe this is a 7-litre reservoir, and these are 7-litre pots for the Chili Grow. Now, as I said, these are quite old, and the newer versions, the pots are slightly larger. But the one thing that I don't like about the design of these pots is that these pots are very tall. I much prefer the pots being shorter and wider rather than narrower and taller. The main reason is because once these get bigger, obviously these peppers that I've got here aren't that big, they're only about a foot tall, they can become extremely top heavy. I mean, you can see just from me moving this around now, obviously I'm forcing it, but they actually become quite unstable. Luckily this year, I haven't had any issues with that, but in previous years before, I have had it where things do blow over and they fall down. This isn't an issue with regards to its operation, but it's just more my preference. When you have a wicking system that is narrow and tall, doing things like the top dress, because it's a very small area here in terms of the feeding, it becomes a bit more challenging. So these systems are much more reliant on putting nutrients in the water reservoir, which again, I'm an organic gardener, so I don't really like to do that. One little adaptation that I have made to this is using another mulch cap. So this is just a piece of cardboard that I've cut and put around the top here, and you can significantly see the soil is much more moist than the soil on a chili planter that doesn't have a mulch cap. This has been an experiment that I've been doing this year. Obviously, it's very obvious and simple in practice, but I've never done it before, so I thought I'd give it a try, and yeah, it does really work. So because I have these planters, I put them to good use. You know, I would be very wasteful if I wasn't using them, and they work extremely well for peppers. But if I do get more of the planter I'm going to show you next, then I will use that moving forward. This planter is a brand called Biolan. And as I mentioned in the intro, Biolan is a European brand, and I think they're actually based in Norway. I bought these on Amazon a few years ago, and they're actually really reasonably priced at the time. I think they're about £35, which when you think about it, okay, it's a bit more expensive than a normal planter, but actually they work really, really well. They have the design that I prefer, which is wider, deeper, but not very tall. The water reservoir runs again across the bottom, and unfortunately I can't show you here, but I'll show some images from their website of the base layer, which is the part that stops the soil obviously from going into the water reservoir itself, so that's kept nice and neat and clean. There's obviously a built-in wicking system within that as well, which allows the water to wick up cleanly from the water reservoir into the soil to keep this area nice and watered and moist. Now these two planters that I've got here, as you can see, they're just bare topped. I've purposefully kept a row here for fertilizing the soil. Again, I've taken inspiration from the brand Earthbox in the US, which has a fantastic PDF which they suggest for their system, which is a slightly different size and shape, but I'm using it because I can see it's a very tried and tested method that they have. To not overplant, which I do have a habit of doing, having less plants but allowing them to grow stronger, bigger and healthier, but keeping a space here to allow to do a top dress. I haven't done that in this one. This was actually planted sooner than this one, so it's not that this is growing better because these plants are significantly bigger. This is just a much younger setup. Now on the end here, you can see that I've got some really big lettuce within this planter here. Again, this one was planted earlier than the other two planters that I've got here, but the big difference of this one is I do have a plastic mulch cap on this one here. Now, I have noticed a significant difference in how much water this is using versus the other ones. This is using a lot less water. Now, I think it's both a combination of the plants needing to pull up less water because the mulch cap is better regulating the temperature of the soil, but also elemental evaporation. Because the other two are open to the elements, the soil is allowed to be dried both by the sun and also the wind, where this here, because it's protected, it's actually keeping the top layer of soil extremely moist. But not just keeping it moist, also allowing the elemental evaporation to not happen anywhere near at the same rate as what's happening in the other two planters. Now, also bearing in mind these are larger plants, they will be drawing up more water than the other two planters because they're much smaller plants, because they're hungrier, thirstier. I filled up these three planters at exactly the same time to exactly the same level to the maximum point. And 2 days ago, the first two planters run out of water and they are now dry in the bottom of the reservoir. I'll see if I can show you in the tube just here. May or may not be able to see that all the way down to the bottom, but it is dry. Where on this planter, just see the reflection, there's still water in there. Now I used the dipstick to see how much water was in the bottom to see whether it was very close or not. And there was about an inch worth of water, which is a considerable amount, especially when you bear in mind that the reservoir itself is probably only about 2.5, maybe 3 inches tall, which you can see here. So this part here is where the plastic separator, which is obviously what separates the soil and the water reservoir. So this is basically the water reservoir here. And as I said, there was about an inch. So it's done an extremely good job at reducing the evaporation of the water on the soil surface down to a minimum, which is fantastic. Okay, so now onto my DIY version of the self-watering planters. So I will have a video coming out very soon, the actual how to build or how I built these planters themselves. These are secondhand stacking trays, which I purchased from a company, and they're just normal stacking trays that I use in warehouses effectively, but they were going very cheap. So I found the size that I wanted, which is 600 millimeters by 400 millimeters wide, but the height is only 170 millimeters, so 17 centimeters effectively. So really, the materials for this were the stacking trays, some thin piping for the tube to obviously allow water to be watered down, and some capillary rope. Because these are stacked on top of each other, it's very difficult to be able to get a wick from the top into the bottom. Now, the main reason why I actually decided to use these larger reservoirs was simply and purely so that I could have a much larger reservoir of water. Again, this was a bit of a test. All of the self-watering planters that I had found had fairly small water reservoirs in comparison to the capacity of the water that the planters held themselves. So as an example, the Bioland planters that I just showed you, they're 26 litres of soil, but only 7 litres of water. So about a quarter of the size. So I got the same size planters for this. So these are actually 33 litres of capacity within the planters themselves. So 33 litres for the soil and then 33 litres for the water. Now, obviously, it won't be able to be completely 33 litres because there is overflow holes within the reservoir itself, obviously, to allow the runoff if it does rain or you overwater, to stop you from overwatering. And the important thing about that overflow hole, not only is it for the overflow, but it creates an air gap between the top of the water and where the roots can grow through in the top of the planter. And what that does is actually air prune the roots. So it allows roots to grow out sideways once they get to that final point at the bottom. So I can show you that a bit better in just a second. So as you can see here, I've got a mix of peppers and basil in the top here, and it's growing really well. So this is the inside. You can just see this rope just here. So that is the wicking rope that I've got just there. So I have a total of 6 wicking ropes going through the planter from the top to the bottom. And the reason is I want to make sure that obviously I've got plenty of wicking material in the water to be able to pull up the water into the top, because these will be very thirsty, hungry plants. But also I want to make sure that there's no dry spots anywhere to really hurt the wicking process across the soil bed. I want to make sure that that soil bed stays as not over wet, but as moist as it can possibly be in the across the board within there. So there's not one side that's going to get less water than the other, which will mean that you'll get detrimental growing habits. Okay, so that was an introduction video showing you the 3 different types of self-watering planters that I personally use, both purchased, the Chili Grow, the Bioland, and also self-made, homemade with the stacking container style system. Obviously, time will tell how the homemade version stacks up, pardon the pun, in comparison to the purchased versions, because I've only made these about a month ago, and obviously we're going through the season. So far, as you can see, they seem to be doing really well. But yeah, obviously working out what hasn't worked so well with design and how I can tweak it will happen as I move forward. So if you have any questions or interest in self-watering planters, then please let me know down in the comments, and I will obviously do my best to help you out with those queries. And if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel, and check out this playlist right here for some more videos.